Hello and welcome to my fourth match from the Dominion League against Count Mosula. Unfortunately, we didn't see any Rising Sun cards across the 6 games that we played. Instead, this is the feature game because it showcases and illustrates some fundamentals for Dominion endgames. If you are a newer player, I think this video will be especially instructive to you. Let's have a look at the kingdom. We have plus actions from Longship and Launch. Sculptor can provide villagers on occasion. We have draw from Swashbuckler and Longship traditionally. Or you can use any of your action cards to draw 2 cards using the Way of the Otter. Trashing is from Chapel, from Church, from Infirmary, and Bounty Hunter makes the deck thin as well. Gain is from Armory and Sculptor. Critically, there is no plus buy in this kingdom. The absence of buy shapes how we build the deck. It means that the most we could do is get a province a turn here. This is the kind of deck we want to build. It gets to province as fast as possible and consistently for 4 or 5 turns. I think the way to do that is to thin down with Chapel, because Chapel thins the quickest. Use Sculptor to repopulate the economy loss with silver. And once you gain 4 silvers and you can draw enough cards, we have so many sources of draw here because of the Otter. Alternatively, Swashbuckler draws an extra card. That should be sufficient to get you to that deck that buys a province a turn for 4 or 5 turns. My opponent starts off with a Bounty Hunter. Bounty Hunter is a brilliant card in that deck you want to build. Bounty Hunter gives you 3 coin. Bounty Hunter thins the deck. Bounty Hunter is amazing in that deck. Sculptor is also amazing. Sculptor is the heart of the deck, and I have 5-2 luckily. We're taking that Sculptor to the bank here. Both of us get the Chapel. We have similar ideas. The first part of the game is just get thin as quickly as possible and then get to 8 as quickly as possible. Not much else interesting is happening here. My opponent exiles an estate. They get money. They get a Swashbuckler first. I think that's fine. It was either that or Sculptor. They get the Swashbuckler. I have 3. This was a little bit of a difficult decision for me. It was between Launch, Silver, Caravan Guard, or Church. I excluded Silver because I had Sculptor to gain the silvers. That would also come with a bonus villager. Launch is a low percentage play. The best cards I could see of a launch were either Chapel or Sculptor. 2 and 7 is not great odds. Church, I thought, was the most useful card. It can let me trash maybe a tad more quickly than my opponent in the opening. And through the middle and end games, Church can either store green cards out of a shuffle. It can store money, excess money. If you hit 9 or 10, you can store the excess in the Church, pass it over to the next turn. It seemed like it was much more versatile than the Caravan Guard. We get the Church, and then we pass it back to my opponent. They launch and they do nothing. Seems strange, but what that means is that Chapel was the bottom card of their deck, unfortunately. Mine collided with the Sculptor, however, I gain a silver, I gain a villager that allows me to then play my Chapel to trash 3 cards from my deck. We won't buy anything on 2, of course. Bounty Hunter exile for my opponent, and then Chapel trash. They have 3 as well. They make a different choice. They go for a silver instead of the Church, which is fair, which is reasonable. Their deck is in a different state to mine. I use that Church as an Otter because I wanted to get to 5 coin on this turn. 5 is very important. Maybe it's a second Sculptor, maybe it's a Swashbuckler. I have enough money to launch to, so I was confident in drawing with the Otter Church. That allows me to launch into my Sculptor and also my Chapel. I trash 3 more coppers from the deck and then pass it back to my opponent. Swashbuckler into launch for them. And they get to clean up quite a few cards from their deck here. So despite the Chapel missing, it seems like they're they are a little bit ahead on the trashing even. Bounty Hunter exile, they trash, they pass it back to me. I miss 5 here, which is a little sad, but I don't have a Bounty Hunter yet. This is an excellent opportunity to get a Bounty Hunter. Great card, great card for the deck. Does a lot of work. Turn 7 for my opponent. Here, they are able to draw a deck. They launch into the Bounty Hunter, and they'd have just enough to get to 5. I was concerned that they didn't have enough money in the deck, but it turns out they had enough, just enough to get to 5, and that Sculptor buy will solve their economy problems for the rest of the game. I use the church to set aside an estate here, and then use the chapel as the otter. I am not going to play the Bounty Hunter because 7 is not that much different from 5 in this kingdom. There's no plus buy. All I want here is a 5 cost. I calculate that I can even launch here and still hit 5. Turns out I calculate right, but you have to launch with the 2 silvers in play. My plan was to exile the copper, and if I drew money, which I think there is only money left in the deck, an estate is under the church, and an estate is in the deck. If I drew money, I would hit 5. If I drew the estate, I would hit 5, is what I'm trying to say. Calculated well. We exile the estate, and we use the copper to get to 5. Swashbuckler comes down for us, finally. Launch for my opponent. They launch into the Sculptor, they gain a silver, and here, silver makes sense for them. This is the card they have to buy because I have more silver than them. Their deck is thinner than mine, but I have more money. So they have to catch up on the money front, which is why the silver makes sense. Now, I could trash this estate, but because this game is so limited in gains, the decks we've built can only gain 2 cards, one from a Sculptor and one from the default buy. If I trash this, I will have less points than my opponent, and it is very difficult because of the lack of gain and plus buy to actually overcome that deficit in points. So I'm going to save that with the end game in mind and exile it with the Bounty Hunter, gain a silver with the Sculptor, and here I draw with the Swashbuckler. Now, I have money for province. Do you take the province? Well, let me explain. In games with limited gains like this, if you're a second player, you generally want to score first. Doing that gives you a better chance of winning the game. Because if we go province, 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 at the end, the scores will be tied, but you will win because your opponent is first player. You are not first player. They cannot tie. They have to overcome your score to win the game. That's the rules. If instead you are satisfied with a tie or you need the extra turn to build up more, then you can be quiet here, launch, draw the last card of the deck, use the chapel to trash out these coppers, maybe buy another Sculptor, and then pass it back to your opponent. I chose the aggressive option. I wanted to win the game, so I bought a province, and I felt confident in my deck's ability to get to province for the next 3 or 4 turns. Additionally, I knew I didn't have another turn to build here because my opponent can hit 8 on their next turn, and then I would have to settle for a tie at best. There was no way I'm going to win unless they have some kind of spectacular stall late in the end game. However, barring that, I would probably just have to settle for a tie. But we don't play for ties here. We play to win. Take the province, pass it back to my opponent. Let me see what they can do now. As we calculated, they can hit 8, and it turns out to be true. They can hit 8. They buy a province, pass it back to me. Chapel, not really. It's an otter. Otter finds me a Sculptor. We play the Sculptor straight away. We refrain from playing the Swashbuckler because I have all the resources I need right here in this hand to get to 8. Additionally, I know the top 5 cards of the deck. The top 5 cards of the deck already has 7 coin in it. It's very likely that I'll get to 8 again. So we get to province number 2 here. So we're going back and forth with the provinces. My opponent will answer me back with a province. Their deck is also consistent. Their deck is more consistent than mine because they've been able to trash a little more. they're even able to launch and still buy province. So they launch, exile a province with the bounty hunter, gain a silver with the sculptor. Wrong. They don't gain the silver with the sculptor because they already have enough money in hand. What do they do instead? They sculpt an estate for the end game because they also know a tie is coming and they know they are on the wrong side of the tie. They know they have to break the tie. They have the opportunity now to break the tie. So they gain the estate. Said, all right, Count Mosula, I see you. I see you. So that's an additional problem for me to overcome here. They have a 1 point lead. I exile my province, gain money from the bounty hunter. Church draws me into the swashbuckler. Again, we don't need to draw it. And I feel relatively confident in the rest of the cards to be able to get the province. There's a sculptor in there. There's a chapel for draw as well. Province number 3 for me. My opponent sculpts a silver, just gets to 8. So they have 3 provinces as well, and we've hit the point of the game where there are just 2 provinces left. This is where the famous penultimate province rule comes from. If I buy a province now, that is a losing play for me because it opens up an avenue for my opponent to win off a province gain. Province buy, sorry. So, what do? I play the chapel as an otter because I want to find the sculptor. That is an important card to find. I could gain the silver here. So here you also have to make a decision in the end game. You can gain the silver, buy the province, and what that says is I think my opponent cannot get to province on the next turn, and I think I can get to province on the next turn. I think I can take the last 2 provinces. So that is one path to victory. I don't think there's a highly probable path to victory in this case because my opponent has a more consistent deck than me. So what I am going to do instead is I'm going to gain an estate here with the sculptor and just buy a duchy. And see what my opponent does. The estate makes me equal to them, and then the duchy puts me ahead by 3 points. Now let's see what my opponent decides to do. Do they decide to go for the province, or do they decide to duchy dance with me? Here's their swashbuckler. Here's their sculptor. Church. They sculpt a church. They probably set aside money there if I had to guess. And they are going into the duchy dance with me. Okay, so let's see this part of the end game now. My church tours a province away. That doesn't really help. And I buy a duchy. I can only afford a duchy in that case. I didn't have the option to go for the province there. Bounty hunter for my opponent. Exiles province. They launch, and they still have enough money to buy a duchy. We each have 2 duchies. All right. I'm not going to trash any of my money. I cannot afford to trash any of my money right now. Exile copper here. That gains me 3 coin. That was the first time I exiled a copper for this game, surprisingly. And we draw with the swashbuckler. Why I exile the copper there is because I want to try to hit province now. Now that my opponent has put a couple duchies in their deck, it is a little bit less consistent. So maybe they miss on the next turn. It's not clear because there's a fresh shuffle. They could be holding 4 silvers for all I know. So it's a risky play. In fact, here I didn't have the province money yet. I was just going to duchy dance again with them there. However, I felt it was important to play this sculptor. So I launched. I would gain back 2 coin from the sculptor from the launch anyway. And it turns out, well, launch drew me a silver, and then I gained another silver, so I have the province here if I want. Do I take it? Well, I chose to take it here, and I think that's a reasonable decision in my position. My deck is worse. My deck is worse than my opponent. The longer we duchy dance is, the more likely it is that I will lose this game. So I decided to roll the dice here. Take the province now. That'll be my 4th province. And hope my opponent doesn't get it on their next turn. I have a clean shuffle as well. Maybe I get it on my next turn too. Clearly I don't have it. Though they have it, they launch and they top deck the swashbuckler. How you could do something so sinister when I'm trying to win the game here. Bounty Hunter exiles province. Do you have 8? So, oh, you don't. I don't have 8 either though. They just buy the duchy. So I did wait long enough and it turns out they did stall out a little bit. So my timing was reasonably good there, but I can't capitalize, unfortunately, in this position. I can get a duchy here though, or a couple of estates. It's up to me. I can gain an estate, buy an estate, preserve the villager, or I can gain a bounty hunter, exile the duchy, get the duchy. I need to stay ahead on points. There's no way around that. If I only gain 2 points there, then my opponent can win off a simple province buy. Now they can't do that. They have to both buy the province and gain an estate off the sculptor. It is much more difficult. There is some consideration here to discard in this duchy, because if we come back around and the bounty hunter sees a duchy, I can gain 3 more coins again. I decided to keep it in exile because there's a heap of green cards in my deck as is. Here's the otter. Here's a launch. They launch into another swashbuckler. Mines is hiding somewhere. Not good signs for me. But the longer they take is the more I think they don't have it. They don't have it. They missed province twice in a row now. They only have enough for duchy. Okay. Okay, and they haven't even played the sculptor to gain an estate here. So what can I do in this position? Well, I'm very close to 8. I have 7. I can exile the chapel for 3 coin, and then I have 4 more. This is agonizingly close. I don't have any more villagers. I could launch and see what happens. Or I could just play it safe, exile the chapel, buy my duchy, and go back in the deck and hope to find 8 next turn. The swashbuckler is coming up. However, at this point, I made a slight miscalculation. I thought I could launch and still buy duchy. To my horror, that is not true. And now I have to scramble and try to find enough money for a duchy here. So this chapel will not be exiled. It'll be as an otter in a desperate attempt to find money. And we find money. We find enough money for duchy here. However, I had to use extra resources to get there. Extra resources that maybe could have been used for a province. Probably not, because I drew 4 cards and still didn't see the swashbuckler, but I didn't know that. Alright, the duchies are empty. I have maintained a 6-point lead. Once again, my opponent has to gain a province and an estate to win the game here. Let's see now. They're just estates left. They have their sculptor in hand, I believe. Or they find it off the launch. Either way, it doesn't matter because they sculpt an estate and they buy an estate here. So I have to be able to make that same play to break the tie. However, my sculptor is somewhere in those 15 cards. It's not clear to me where that is. I play the church. I don't set aside because I'm looking for the province here. I already have 5 cards in my hand. I can play the swashbuckler. I can launch and maybe get there. It's not clear to me. Also, I can maybe find the sculptor. Sculpt the estate, buy the estate, and stay 6 points ahead of my opponent. Swashbuckler draws me 2 bounty hunters and a province. This is not 8. If I had a villager, this would be 8. I would win here. You exile bounty hunter with bounty hunter and you have the 5. But for lack of a villager, we don't have the money, so I have to launch here. If I can't get province, I need to try to get 2 estates to stay 6 points ahead from my opponent. We launch. We do not find the sculptor, and there's no chance that I do find the sculptor because I have no villagers. Instead, I exile a silver for money of the bounty hunter, and I use the second one to draw 2 cards. I don't find the province. I just have to take my 1 estate and pass it back to my opponent. And they missed once, they missed twice. They do not miss a 3rd time here. They find enough money for the province and take the win. I hope you learned some Dominion fundamentals about endgames. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.